Any weakness or irrelevant response simply unties the hands of the aggressors, no matter how cliché it may sound. Practice from 2008 and earlier shows this, especially in the context of the Russian Federation. Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, ended his trip 3.5 hours earlier than planned, despite the fact that he could have done it 3 hours earlier, as he knew about the attack on the Dutch. In any case, the situation has developed as it has developed. Blinken, commenting on the tragedy in the match with Shamsi, noted that we support Israel's right to protect its citizens from terrorist attacks. All signs point to the missile that hit the match with Shamsi in the Netherlands being launched by Hezbollah. But he started for health, ended for repose, and added that a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip would be an opportunity to establish a lasting peace on the blue line between Israel and Lebanon. And what kind of blue line can there be when the red lines are crossed by terrorists? And what does this careful position of the Biden administration so far say?
The position of the Biden administration is universal for all regions and can be expressed by the phrase "as long as there is no war," and so that nothing happens. It is inconvenient for them from a political point of view, whether it is an escalation with Russia. Of course, they are uncomfortable. They are very, very afraid of it. They are uncomfortable with the escalation with Iran. They are not comfortable with the expansion of the wars that are now going on in the Middle East. So, this is from the point of view of the Biden administration. The blue line is, by the way, the name of the Lebanese-Israeli border in such slang. These are our local realities, but Blinken expresses his wishes in the spirit of American policy, that, they say, in Asia. First of all, he wants the war to end in Gaza. He is not interested in Israeli interests, and in the Israeli interests of ending hostilities. A complete end to hostilities in Gaza is not included, of course, but this is not even the point. He implies that Hezbollah will cease fire if the fire ceases in Gaza, and everything must take its course. If this really goes ahead, it will be the very strategic defeat for Israel that I have already mentioned. It is in Israel's interest not only to cease fire on the blue line between Israel and Lebanon, Israel and Hezbollah, but also to fundamentally change the rules of the game. A situation where the terrorist organization Hezbollah, in solidarity with other terrorists, attacks Israel at its own discretion, shells Israel for 9 months, as a result of which 80,000 of our citizens are evacuated, dozens are killed, billions of dollars in damage are caused, military forces are diverted to Hezbollah, which prevents them from solving other tasks, and at the same time Hezbollah acts as if they will not be punished for this from a strategic point of view. Absolutely unacceptable. In such a situation, it is necessary to change everything radically, so that for decades they will be discouraged from them and those on whom Hezbollah relies. The desire to fight Israel is a strategic task that is so important that it is worth pursuing, even if there are serious losses. And there will undoubtedly be serious losses in the event of a major war with Hezbollah. Estimated losses are such a concept. They speak of hundreds of dead in many hundreds of dead at the front. This is at least, but, nevertheless, you need to choose less from two evils. For decades, they have been postponing, as they say, this culmination, and now the culmination is near. If you delay further, it will only get worse.
This is a fact. David talked about possible strategic or tactical plans and scenarios with Netanyahu, not only with Biden, whose administration is coming to an end, but, nevertheless, there is still enough time until January, and it is unlikely that this tactic will change. In addition, Netanyahu met with Donald Trump, already the official Republican candidate, and with potential Democratic candidate Kamala Harris. They have different visions of the situation and the war in the Gaza Strip. Trump generally says, if not me, then there will be a third world war. Harris does not understand what to do in the Gaza Strip, according to Trump. And who would you bet on here? Or is it too early to talk about the proposed scenarios for the arrival of this or that candidate for the post of head of the White House?
It's not who I bet on, it's who the people of the United States bet on. We around the world, and especially those who are heavily dependent on Americans and who are in a threatened situation, are watching with great interest and excitement what will happen in the elections in the United States. However, all these preferences and reasoning, in my opinion, until November are just an attempt to pass off wishful thinking and resemble cheering for your favorite team. Since it doesn't do any good, I prefer to watch as coolly as possible, sometimes listening to what the candidates have to say, such as what Harris says and what Trump says. At the same time, it is important to be aware that what is said without being in power may differ from what will actually happen after coming to power. This applies to both Harris and Trump, despite the fact that Harris now seems to be close to the helm. People will ultimately depend on which team surrounds and who the winner of the presidential race will rely on.
Тем не менее, так вот, люди, очень многое будет зависеть от того, какая команда будет окружать и на кого будут полагаться тот или иной победитель в президентской гонке.
In any case, from Israel's point of view, I can say for sure that Kamala Harris and the statements that she has made, including in recent days, do not look, let's say, positive and promising. However, this is a general assessment, and in any case, you will have to wait for the result of the choice. Before that, it is worth saving your nerves, especially since it is difficult, to put it mildly, to influence the outcome of the elections, except for the American citizens themselves.
It is accepted, yes, we also do not like to engage in conspiracy theories. We, in turn, are watching the issue of the Russian-Ukrainian war and discussing it, because different plans are emerging, and we keep it in the spotlight, experiencing some nervousness, but not panic. As for the other beneficiaries of the aggravation of the situation in the Middle East, from the fact that the escalation between Hezbollah and Israel is inevitable and periodically manifests, one can wonder, does Iran, for example, benefit, or are they also just watching?
Iran adheres. First of all, Iran does not just observe. Hezbollah is Iran's most important tool. Hezbollah is its best. It is not even entirely correct to say puppet and proxy, it is a half ally, half puppet. This is an important tool in which tens of billions of dollars and huge resources, colossal resources, personnel, intellectual and all kinds of resources have been invested over the past 40 years. Iran has always preferred in recent years to stay a little behind the scenes and deploy its forces in the Middle East against its adversaries such as Israel, the United States and other Arab countries. These forces include, of course, Hezbollah, pro-Iranian groups in Iraq and Syria, as well as Palestinian groups such as Islamic Jihad, which is quite pro-Iranian, although it is also generally independent. And, of course, the Houthis. And we see how Iran manages to do this, and the Houthis have paralyzed shipping to a noticeable degree in the most important region of the world with a very toothless reaction from the United States. Hezbollah, as we can see, is quite active in Iraq. Actions are taking place, and one of Iran's goals is to take control of Iraq. Well, let's just say to have a very, very serious influence in Iraq. There they do it with varying success, but to a noticeable extent. In general, Iran, without acting by force, is strengthening and intensifying its expansion in the region, strengthening its military technical cooperation with Russia, China and North Korea, which is its long-standing partner. This cooperation with Russia gives Iran a margin of safety. I will say more. In 2015, when the Obama administration mistakenly agreed to the so-called nuclear deal with Iran, this largely untied Iran's hands, in terms of profitability from the lifting of sanctions and the absence of fears of various kinds of actions on the part of the United States. And then Iranian-Russian cooperation went up, primarily in Syria. Further, despite the elements of rivalry, it found an additional manifestation. In fact, when the big war in Ukraine began, in general, Iran is not sitting idly by, it is threatening Israel and preparing for a breakthrough to nuclear weapons from under the vaults. Iran is a very, very serious player, very problematic. For Israel, this is the main enemy that is behind many actions that seem to be carried out by other parties or participants.
The total destruction of Hamas, Hezbollah and similar groups will bring down Iran completely or at least by 50%?
First of all, the concept of total destruction is, I would say, too strong. It is not entirely possible. That is, it is difficult to completely destroy the idea. It is possible to destroy a huge number of its carriers and undermine military potential. So, the military potential of Hamas has already been very, very seriously undermined, although there is still work to be done. Hezbollah is one of the important tasks. Hezbollah is Iran's most important tool, which was created, among other things, to intimidate Israel and force it to refrain from attacking Iran's nuclear facilities. And if Israel does strike Iran's nuclear facilities, Iran will face very serious retaliation, because Hezbollah's arsenal is simply amazing. What Iran can deliver to Israel, including missiles and so on, it cannot deliver from its territory. Therefore, Hezbollah, which is close to Israel, threatens Israel to a significant extent more than Iran itself. This is the situation. Without nuclear weapons, the destruction of a significant part of Hezbollah's arsenal, as well as a change in its status in Lebanon, if any, would be a major blow to Iran and its expansion in the Middle East. This would be a major defeat for Iran, but it would be wrong to claim that it would fundamentally change Iran's capabilities. Iran still has its own capabilities, and they also need to be hit by those who understand how great the Iranian threat is. This understanding must come sooner or later. And in addition, Iran, of course, will try to restore the strength of its allies who have suffered or have already suffered serious damage. And here the task of Israel and other players in this region is to prevent them from restoring their military potential to the conditionally pre-war level.
David, Iran not only has its own resources, but also Russian ones. Apparently they are constantly exchanging them. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War remind us again that Russia is helping Iran and Kandurta, and Iran, in turn, is exchanging something new with Russia. And how much is Russia doing now to ensure that Iran's nuclear development reaches a new level?
Well, regarding Iran's nuclear developments, the issue is the most important and the most serious one that worries Israel the most. The fact that Russia cooperated with Iran in the civilian nuclear sphere, building a nuclear power plant for it, indirectly, of course, helped the development of the military nuclear program. Although, it would seem, this is something different, but not quite different. These are close relatives relatively. However, the direct transfer of nuclear technology for the creation of nuclear weapons to Iran has not yet been observed. It is generally believed that this is contrary to the interests of Russia. Let's just say that giving someone a nuclear bomb, roughly speaking, is an extremely rare step that is taken only for very good reasons. For Russia, Iran has long been a rival to a certain extent, despite the fact that Iran is now a partner and situational ally of Russia. Even in Syria, where they fought as allies, Iran borders Russia on the Caspian Sea, and is a fundamentalist Shiite state with a very specific ideology. It would be wrong to say that this is an age-old friend of Russia. This means that giving nuclear weapons to someone is extremely problematic. Why? First of all, it can turn against you someday. Secondly, it will cause great discontent in a number of countries to which Iran poses a threat. And it's not just about Israel and the United States. To say that, say, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates will not be happy with Russia's assistance in the nuclear sphere of Iran is to say nothing. The appearance of a nuclear bomb will lead to a nuclear arms race in Iran and among other countries, which is also unlikely to please Russia, including its neighbors, including Turkey. Therefore, in principle, such things, as a rule, are not done. However, if Russia feels cornered or decides that this is extremely important for it, this option cannot be ruled out, and Israel is very afraid of this. Israel is therefore doubly cautious. To what extent this is justified is another question. So far, without nuclear components, Russia and Iran are exchanging everything each other has. Iran purchased Russian fighters to improve the condition of its air force, since their fighters are generally outdated. They also acquire something else. Naturally, we see that Russia is acquiring drones from Iran, Shads 136 and 131, apparently, ammunition and ammunition. In general, the parties have found each other. The Iranians have long established cooperation with North Korea, and the North Koreans with the Iranians. There has been a very close cooperation between them for decades. This is the triangle that China is specifically watching.
China is entering the negotiation arena not only on the Russian-Ukrainian war and the war in Israel, but in recent days it has been especially active. Sometimes he goes, then flies, meets, he becomes an elusive negotiator. What is China looking for? What is it counting on? And how can it influence the development of the situation in Israel and the Gaza Strip?
China has long focused on its economic, technological, and military development. In recent years, however, China has felt that it is approaching superpower status or even trying to become one. And what is a superpower? This is active political activity and powerful political activity in a variety of regions, and not only within their borders. The Middle East region, Europe, and the Russian-Ukrainian war are the cases when you can prove yourself. With what degree of success is another question, but we see an increase in Chinese activity, which is not only economic, but also diplomatic in nature, for quite a long time and continues to remain at a high level. Let me remind you that diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran were restored with Chinese mediation.
Показывает, что он работает с двумя важнейшими игроками в нашем регионе, причем вот приводит даже к результату.
And the so-called Palestinian problem is a problem that has existed for decades. The establishment of the State of Israel is always on the agenda, and as a major power, China is trying to participate in its solution. We see the visits of the heads and representatives of Palestinian factions to China, where they signed some kind of agreement on reconciliation and cooperation. However, Chinese diplomats may have taken on too much, because Hamas and Fatah have tried to conclude such agreements many times, and due to the deepest contradictions, nothing has worked. True, it cannot be ruled out that suddenly something will change, but they usually do not bet on suddenly. The Chinese are trying to find their place here and are becoming an increasingly active player in the Middle East, which must be reckoned with and closely monitored, not only in the Middle East, but in general.
И с этим нужно считаться, и за этим нужно пристально следить. И, кстати, не только на Ближнем Востоке, а по большому счету и везде.
China is a superpower in the making, and some might say that it already is. It certainly needs to be reckoned with and understand how to counter if China's actions pose a threat.
Yes, China is not only constantly eyeing Taiwan and apparently preparing for action. Our expert, international affairs expert Artur Kharitonov, claims that by 2027 there will almost inevitably be an attempt by China to seize Taiwan, although these are only forecasts so far. At the same time, China, as we know, both in the context of Russia and, possibly, in the context of Iran, opposes the use of nuclear weapons. China always speaks in its statements, at least in public rhetoric, about the inadmissibility of nuclear escalation in the 21st century. How dangerous can the situation be between players such as China and Iran, for example?
China, it seems, adheres to a certain position, and with China, in fact, it is difficult to understand many things. There are only declarative statements in the style of "for all the good," and on the other hand, real actions. Nevertheless, it is generally accepted that the nuclear blackmail that Russia uses does not please China. China adheres, let's say, to a less radical position on the use of nuclear weapons. On the other hand, China is developing its own nuclear sphere and nuclear weapons.
С другой стороны, Китай сам развивает, естественно, свою ядерную сферу и средства ядерного поражения.
He believes that one of the options to achieve parity with the United States is, to put it mildly, not the last direction. As for the transfer of nuclear technology to Iran, China has not yet been seen in this, and it is most likely not particularly interested in any country acquiring nuclear weapons, which could lead to a chain reaction of a nuclear arms race. In general, I think China would be very unhappy if, as part of the general nuclear arms race, nuclear weapons ended up in Japan, Taiwan or South Korea, for example.
Таковое ядерное оружие оказалось и у, скажем, у Японии, у Тайваня и у Южной Кореи.
But this alignment is also not excluded if these countries decide that the rules have stopped working and the restrictions should be lifted. So, the situation with China is problematic. Nevertheless, so far on nuclear issues, he does not seem to have transmitted what should not be transmitted. On the other hand, its cooperation with Iran is very close. Many Iranian weapons systems are licensed Chinese ones. And, of course, the key question is to whom and how China will or will not dare to supply its weapons. And we remember that in everything that concerns Russia, the role of China is very great, because it is the main buyer of Russian minerals, and consequently of Russian revenues. This is largely of Chinese origin. The main thing is that dual-use goods go to Russia through China, and thanks to China, the Russian production base, including the base of the Russian military-industrial complex, is largely operating.